One of the most extreme weather disasters just hit South Korea in decades. A wall of water has torn through the southern coast of the country, turning city streets into rivers, burying homes under mud, and leaving at least one person dead. The city of Geoje in South Gyeongsang province, along with the neighboring city of Tongyeong, has been overwhelmed by rainfall so intense that meteorologists are calling it a once-in-200-years event. Over the next few minutes, we are going to walk you through exactly what happened, why it happened, who has been affected, and where the recovery effort stands right now. Let's start with the scale of the rain itself, because the numbers here are almost hard to believe. Rain began falling on Geoje on Saturday evening at the start of South Korea's three-day Liberation Day holiday weekend. What started as a heavy downpour steadily grew worse through Sunday, and then in the early hours of Monday morning, it turned catastrophic. Between midnight Saturday and 1 in the afternoon on Monday, Geoje recorded 851.1 millimeters of rain. To put that in perspective, that is close to a full meter of water falling from the sky in under 2 days. By Tuesday morning, the cumulative total for Geoje since Saturday had climbed to 958 millimeters, a figure that already exceeds the average amount of rain the city normally receives across an entire summer. In just the 24 hours leading up to 6 in the evening on Monday, Geoje received 638.7 millimeters of rain, the highest daily total ever recorded in the city. Tongyeong, close by, had its own record day too, with 453.7 millimeters falling in 24 hours. But it wasn't just the total volume of water that made this storm so dangerous, it was the speed at which it fell. At around 1:32 in the morning on Monday, Geoje was hit by a burst of rain measuring 124.5 millimeters in a single hour. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, that is an intensity so extreme it is only expected to happen once every 200 years, and it is the highest hourly rainfall ever recorded in the city since record-keeping began there in 1972. Tongyeong also broke its own hourly record, with 97.4 millimeters falling in just 60 minutes, an event with roughly a 100-year return period. Meteorologists explained that the disaster was caused by the remnants of a weakening tropical system colliding with an unusually warm and moisture-heavy air mass moving up from the south. When that saturated air ran into the mountainous terrain around Geoje, it was forced upward rapidly, wringing out enormous amounts of rain over a very narrow and concentrated area, almost like squeezing a sponge over one single spot on the map. To add another layer of cruelty to this disaster, the flooding coincided directly with high tide along the coast. As the rivers and drainage canals swelled with runoff from the mountains, the rising sea level at high tide effectively blocked that water from draining out into the ocean. With nowhere left to go, the floodwater was forced back inland, surging into low-lying neighborhoods across the city almost instantly. Residents described the water rising with terrifying speed. One resident, a man in his 50s from Geoje, said the emergency alert on his phone went off 3 times through the night, waking him again and again with warnings to evacuate, while outside his window the rain kept getting heavier and heavier. The most devastating single moment of this disaster came at around 4:30 in the morning on Monday in the Okpodong neighborhood of Geoje. A hillside above a residential apartment complex, already saturated far beyond its limit by days of relentless rain, gave way. A landslide of mud, rock, and uprooted trees came crashing down the slope and slammed directly into the building below, burying its first floor entirely. Firefighters were dispatched within minutes and worked through the mud and debris to reach anyone trapped inside. They managed to pull 2 residents out alive from the buried ground floor. A third resident was also pulled from the wreckage but was found in cardiac arrest. Paramedics rushed him to a nearby hospital while performing continuous resuscitation, but he could not be saved and he was pronounced dead a short time later. 2 other residents suffered injuries in the landslide and required hospital treatment. In nearby Tongyeong, a separate landslide buried another person who was rescued alive by emergency crews. These 2 events remain the most serious human toll of the disaster so far, with 1 confirmed death and several people injured across the region. Away from the landslides, the flooding itself turned entire sections of Geoje into what residents can only describe as rivers running down what used to be city streets. Dashcam and phone footage from the area, later broadcast by major news agencies, showed roads completely submerged, with cars, vans, and delivery trucks partially underwater, some of them drifting slowly with the current. More than 20 roads across the city, including major routes through the Suwol-dong and Ajudong districts, had to be closed entirely, cutting off bus services and stranding residents in place. Local waterways burst their banks as they struggled to cope with the sheer volume of runoff pouring down from the surrounding hills, adding even more water to streets that were already overwhelmed. In some neighborhoods, residents found themselves trapped on the upper floors of their own homes as water filled the ground level beneath them, with nowhere to go until rescue crews arrived. The scale of the emergency response reflects just how serious the situation became. In Geoje alone, fire authorities raised their internal alert to level 2 of their emergency response system in the early morning hours, mobilizing the vast majority of their personnel and equipment. Nationally, the Korea National Fire Agency issued what is called a National Firefighting Mobilization Order, a rare measure that pulls in firefighting resources from outside the immediately affected province. Under that order, more than 380 firefighters from the South Gyeongsang Regional Fire Service, along with additional personnel from South Gyeongsang and Central Rescue Headquarters, were concentrated in Geoje and Tongyeong, supported by dozens of pieces of heavy equipment including water pumps and excavators. Crews conducted targeted evacuations across several vulnerable communities. In Yesil village in the Ajudong area, around 100 residents were evacuated as landslide risk grew too high to ignore. In Hojin village, roughly 30 stranded residents were rescued and moved to safety. Across Geoje and Tongyeong combined, authorities received close to 2,000 emergency calls and reports within the first day alone, and firefighters carried out well over 100 individual rescues. The disruption to daily life across the city has been enormous. More than 2,000 households across Geoje and Tongyeong lost electricity as the storm knocked out power infrastructure. Water service was also cut in several areas, with recovery crews still working as of Tuesday to restore supply to roughly 1,000 households in one township in Tongyeong and more than 4,000 households spread across 6 townships and neighborhoods in Geoje. At least a dozen schools and daycare centers across the 2 cities suffered flooding damage to their buildings or grounds. As of Tuesday morning, 20 of Geoje's 30 schools remained closed while officials assessed and repaired the damage, forcing a shift to remote or delayed learning for thousands of students. Public transportation across the city was suspended for large stretches of Monday, and even into Tuesday, several major roads remained closed while crews cleared mud, fallen trees, and debris. The Korea Expressway Corporation was forced to close the Tongyeong toll gate on the Tongyeong to Dagon Expressway entirely, rerouting drivers through a detour at the North Tongyeong interchange. The economic impact has also been significant because Geoje is not just a coastal city, it is one of the most important shipbuilding centers on the entire planet. It is home to 2 of South Korea's largest shipyards, operated by Hanwha Ocean and by Samsung Heavy Industries, companies that together employ tens of thousands of workers and build some of the largest vessels in the world. On Monday, with roads across the city flooded or closed and travel considered too dangerous, both companies told their employees not to report to work. Hanwha Ocean notified staff through its internal disaster response center that commuting into the shipyard, located in the Ajudong area, was simply not possible given the state of the roads. Samsung Heavy Industries, whose yard sits in Jangpyeongdong, told workers scheduled for holiday overtime shifts to stay home and remain on standby rather than risk the commute. At the government level, the response moved quickly once the scale of the disaster became clear. The Ministry of the Interior and Safety activated Level 1 of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters at 6 in the morning on Monday, shortly after heavy rain warnings were issued for Busan, South Gyeongsang Province, and Jeju Island. Interior Minister Yoon Ho-jung, who leads that headquarters, pledged to mobilize every available resource across all relevant agencies to protect lives until the rain stopped and recovery was complete. Prime Minister Han Sang-suk also weighed in directly, instructing police, firefighters, and other safety authorities to use every resource available to rescue residents and support evacuees, and calling specifically for temporary shelters to be run smoothly so that displaced residents face no unnecessary hardship. The Korea Forest Service also stepped in to help, deploying more than 70 members of its specialized forest disaster response crews to Geoje and Tongyeong, along with dozens of pieces of heavy equipment, including forest fire engines and excavators, to assist with debris clearance and slope stabilization work. So where do things stand right now as of Tuesday? Nationally, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters has logged more than 2,500 damage reports tied to this storm, covering everything from flooded homes and roads to fallen trees. Of those, roughly 2,000 involved general safety measures, several hundred involved drainage and water supply support, and more than 160 were direct rescue operations. Across Busan, South Gyeongsang Province, and Jeju combined, 564 people from over 300 households were evacuated at the height of the crisis. As of the latest count, more than 300 of those residents have already been able to return to their homes, though close to 250 people are still unable to go back, either because their homes remain unsafe or because cleanup work is still ongoing. Farmland has not been spared either, with reports of flooded fig and pepper crops in neighboring South Jeolla Province. The heavy rain advisory for the region has now been lifted, and the main rain band has largely pushed away from the southern coast, though light intermittent rain was still falling over Geoje as recently as Tuesday afternoon. Emergency crews have shifted their focus from active rescue toward mud clearance, drainage repair, restoring power and water service, and carrying out structural safety checks on damaged buildings, including the apartment complex in Okpo-dong, where Monday's fatal landslide occurred. As recovery continues in Geoje and Tongyeong, authorities are urging residents in landslide-prone areas and near riverbanks to remain cautious, since ground already saturated by this record rainfall can remain unstable for days or even weeks afterward. Officials have not ruled out further localized flooding or slope failures if additional rain moves through the region in the coming days. For now, the people of Geoje are left assessing the damage, drying out their homes, and beginning the long process of rebuilding a city that in the space of just 72 hours went from suffering a historic drought to enduring one of the most extreme rainfall events ever recorded on the Korean peninsula. That is our full report for tonight. We will continue to follow this story and bring you updates as recovery efforts in South Korea continue.